Hello. Well, apparently President Trump referred to some countries as shitholes. Everyone is shocked. I thought you might be interested in a previous case which happened, 1985, and it involved a government minister in England called Alan Clark. He died in 1999, so this is all practically historical. He was flamboyant and controversial, and there was apparently some sort of a private meeting, some sort of an enclosed meeting. It wasn't public, as Trump's meeting was not public. And there was some discussion about some people who were going to leave Britain. There was some problem they had. I don't know what it was, but Clark said, and he didn't deny this, well, if they don't like it, they can go back to Bongo land. This was reported in the press in shock, but also with a certain amused tolerance somehow. That's what you expect from Alan Clark. He published his diaries in 1993, and his diaries were full of references to the women he'd met during the day. It could be a shop assistant or a parliamentary secretary or even Margaret Thatcher. There were aspects of these women he found attractive, and he discussed these aspects in great detail in his diaries. Some sections of the press regarded him as the very definition of a male chauvinist right-winger. But you see, that's the problem with the left, because they see people as one thing. So if somebody is bad in one way or unacceptable in some way, they're unacceptable across the spectrum in every way. But that's not the way people are. Alan Clark, as a matter of fact, was a vegetarian who involved himself in much agitation for better treatment of animals. He hated cruelty of any sort and was very outspoken in defence of victims, human or animal. And he was very charming. Oh yeah, by the way, he named his dog, a Rottweiler, Eva Brown. Now, you may have heard about recently the case of a man called Mark Meechan. You could look him up. He's been dragged through the courts in Scotland for teaching his girlfriend's pug to make a Nazi salute as a joke. We'll get back to that in a little while, but first I want to tell you about another person who gets the indulgence of the press, and that's Prince Philip. He's come out with dozens of politically incorrect things. Let's go through a couple of them. On a state visit to China, he was talking to some British students who were there to learn Chinese, and he warned them not to eat too much rice because if they did, they'd end up with slitty eyes. This was in public view with journalists there. He didn't care. A group of the East End, by the way, it's a famously poor area of London, and he was speaking to a group of women at an East End community centre, and he said to them, "So, who do you sponge off?" That's shocking. I mean, it's shocking. He said who, and he should have said whom, and off, that's a dangling participle. It should have been off whom do you sponge? So you see, this is really a bad person. The president of Nigeria, who was dressed in the full kaftan for some official function, Prince Philip greeted him with the words, "You look like you're ready for bed." And to a British trekker in Papua New Guinea, he said, "Oh, so you managed not to get eaten then?" Oh, yes. And he called Helmut Kohl the Chancellor of Germany. He referred to him as the Reichskanzler, which is That's what Hitler called himself. In all cases, the press were obviously amused by these outbursts, and although they tutted a bit, there was no constitutional crisis over them. After Clark's death, the Independent newspaper recorded that he said the unsayable. Note that they didn't say he said the insulting or even that he said the inaccurate. They admitted that someone has to say these things, even if governments could not. But what they never asked is why they, the journalists, are not saying the unsayable. And in that they reveal their own self-censorship and hypocrisy. However, when Trump comes out with the thoroughly accurate definition, shithole, to describe countries that are self-evidently shitholes, then everyone acts as if this is something dreadfully wrong. I'll bet there's not a working class household in the entire United States that doesn't agree with him. So what's the difference between Mr. Meechan, you know, the Nazi pug, and Mr. Clark, or between Trump and Prince Philip? I think that can be found in a comment made by an American comedian recently. I'm sorry, I've forgotten which one it was, but according to her, voting for Trump is the equivalent of putting an above-ground swimming pool in your backyard. Let that sink in for a minute. People who can afford only an overground swimming pool are the sort of people who have no sense of taste and no worthwhile opinions. Because the difference between those people and Prince Philip and Alan Clark is that Prince Philip and Alan Clark are both posh. And Trump is not. Yeah, he was born into a certain wealth, but his flamboyant taste and New York accent make him anything but aristocracy. While the man who was being prosecuted for Nazifying his girlfriend's pug has pierced ears and tattoos. And when people like that think they have every right to voice their opinions and make jokes, well, that's an inversion of the natural order, isn't it? And there's nothing the ruling classes of both Britain and America and their running dogs in the press loathe more than the working classes getting above themselves.